knows the rules as well as anybody. Joins us. Mike, welcome. How are you?
A lot of people still think I'm running the officials.
Yeah, I think they do.
I still get the blame.
That's all right. You know what, though? That's good that they still think you're running the whole show. All right. This rule, were you in its genesis, as it got put in the books, were you a supporter of this rule? Did you think this was a necessary addition to the rule book?
Well, I was a supporter of this rule 6 years ago when I was still there, when it was originally Mike Westhoff that brought it to the table. And he's the one that felt it was way too dangerous to have a 300-pounder getting pushed by another 300-pounder into a player who was in a 4-point stance, and he felt like that this tactic should be banned. And it was discussed by the committee but never passed. And then this year, when the actual players came to the meeting in February in Indianapolis at the competition committee, and they showed some video to the committee and saying that they felt that this should be eliminated from the game, that's when the committee reacted and then went ahead and made the move to eliminate this. So this is not something that was discussed for the first time this year. This has been going on for quite a while, this discussion.
All right, clarify this idea. Where did the second level aspect of this come from?
Well, that's where the discussion came in originally, because if you look at the rule that talks about leaping, where it's illegal to run forward and then leap and land on players, the rule book is very explicit by saying it does not apply to a player that is lined up on the line of scrimmage. You can run forward and leap from the line. If you're lined up in the line of scrimmage, you can run forward and leap and land on players. So the original wording of the rule used that same type of verbiage, but then the committee and the league office looked at it and said, wait a minute, we're trying to eliminate this tactic totally, and so why should we make any exclusion for a player who was also lined up on the line of scrimmage that ends up being the pusher? So they did change the original language long before the rule book went out, because the rule book is very clear that there is no exclusion for a player lined up on the line of scrimmage. And they communicated it to all the clubs when the supervisors went out on their training camp visits, and even on the training camp video that is shown to the players, it mentions nothing about a second-level player or a player, having to be off the line of scrimmage. So while it is unfortunate that that was the original wording that got put out on a video in March, by the way, corrections were made and the right verbiage was put out.
Talk about Mike Pereira, Fox Sports, the rules man. Mike, so we clear up the second level and the verbiage. Now on enforcement. Does it trouble you, and you've always preached common sense with your officials, does it trouble you that the first time a flag of this nature is thrown on 400-plus field goals is on a 56-yarder in overtime?
Well, it doesn't. It's a shame because it has such a big impact, but I don't think you can judge it based on that.
Well, how does it not get called ever all year?
Well, here's the issue. It's you always looked at this as really as a second-level play. I mean, that's, if you look at past videos, you will see it's always the second-level guy pushing a guy on the line of scrimmage. That's where you normally see it. But what happened was teams got pretty smart, and they figured out how to use this technique and do it with both guys from the line of scrimmage. So this is not the first time it's happened. It's happened a couple of times. Well, when you, and I put myself in this situation, when you see a tactic being used that is illegal and it doesn't get called, you put out, as part of your training tape, you put out the plays and you say, look, here's a play, this is the new rule, this is illegally pushing a teammate into the offensive formation on the field goal or try, so you put it out for the officials to see. Now, they saw that, and then they see this in overtime, and so they react and they threw. And I don't think you can say, well, I'm going to call it in the first quarter only, but I'm not going to call it in overtime. If it's a tactic that's used, and if it is a foul, I think you have to call it.
I agree, but how is it that it never has been called all years? It makes me think that it wasn't enforced ever this year.
But I don't think it's happened very many times.
Oh, okay, so you don't. And the Pats evidently were warned, according to people who heard the referee warning them during the game not to do it. So it sounds like that if they did that, that's good officiating.
Yeah, and that's great officiating. officiating if they did do that. But this is like all of a sudden it's a new technique of how special teams coaches figured out how to try to beat the rule. So it hasn't been that prevalent so far, but when you see this technique break out, and it is a copycat league,
right,
and all coaches watch other coaches' tapes, you start saying, oh, well, look, he could maybe get away with this. Let's go ahead and do this also. So when I think, at least from what I'm being told, it's maybe happened only 2 or 3 times prior to this and never got called because of this technique. But once identified by the officiating department, who puts it on a training video for the officials to see, then I think you're likely not to see it happen again.
Talking with Mike Pereira, and Belichick basically admitted today that he had been teaching his guys that he thought he had a loophole by having one defensive lineman go behind another, that was a loophole in the rule.
Yeah, well, it's not a loophole in the rule. It did start out when it was first proposed, and that video that Dean Blandino himself made was way back in March, and that was the original wording. But when the committee got together and discussed it, if it's player safety, it made no sense to eliminate it from happening just because a player or both players, the one that was being pushed and the one that was doing the pushing, to have it on the line of scrimmage, to have it not be a foul just because they were both on the line of scrimmage. So they made it, and they got the word out. The rule book, by the way, is so long and so cumbersome. You can't expect everybody to know all the rules, especially coaches and players.